right. How are you guys? How is everybody? Good? How many of you first time at this event? Excellent. You like it so far? Is it good? This is my first time here. So, it's good. I like the movie theater events. Those are always fun to present at because yeah, how often do you get to stand in front of a screen of that size? Who's seen something good so far? Right, okay. What have you seen that's good? I think there's only been one, right? Well, there was Richard's keynote, and then there's only been one other session, right? I'm not sure. There's been 2 other sessions. Okay, what did you see that was good? Cosmos DB? Excellent. What else? Nothing else was good. Native script? Joe Guadagno? Oh, no, native script. Excellent. Natives. That's fun. All right, who in the room, let me just kind of gauge the audience for a second. Who would classify yourself as a .NET developer? Most, but not all of you. Do I have any Java developers? 1. It's okay, you can be proud. Like, yes. What about Python? Ruby? So no to both. PHP? Okay, so you're a .NET crowd with some notable exceptions. Anybody classify yourself as a JavaScript developer? All right. How many of you that raised your hands are only a JavaScript developer? Okay, so a couple. We're starting to see more and more of this, right? It used to be, I'm old. I'm going to warn you. I'm old. That it used to be that everybody was expected to do everything. And that's becoming less the case, which is kind of why I like to ask. I like to see how many people just do different buckets. Okay. React developers in the room. How many of you do React? Okay. Angular? Some of the concepts are the same. Okay. What other framework? Vue? How many of you have raised your hand for all 3? Okay. I guess that's fair. You can do all of them. Okay, so the reason why I asked that question, the React question, is how much I talk about React depends upon whether everybody in the room knows React already or doesn't know React already. So I'll spend a little bit of extra time kind of walking through the React application itself. And then before we dig into being a progressive web app. You have 1 minute. All right, so I am in this country for 1 more day. Well, no, today. What should I do? Why does everybody laugh at that? This has been great so far. I love this city. The metro is easy to navigate. It's very walkable downtown. The food's great. I love the fact that it seems to be a very normal thing. Tell me if this is normal or not. I don't know, because my experience is limited. Like just big platters of meat. Like that's pretty great. Sometimes, okay. Almost every meal I've had so far, it's just been a big platter of meat brought out and set on the table. And you can't go wrong with that. That's awesome. All right. Let's get started. Progressive web apps with React. I usually put a hashtag of some sort. If you guys want to tweet about this talk, use the hashtag just for the fun of it, really. No real reason. All right, so we are at a conference, and typically there's one thing about conferences that are fairly universal. So there we go. So we have a schedule, right? And when this session ends, almost universally, everybody's going to look at their schedule, generally on their phone, although a lot of you do have papers, and you're going to attempt to see the schedule for the next talk that you want to go to. I've been to a lot of conferences, and generally, this one seems to have been pretty good, so you may be spoiled, but generally, you get the dinosaur game when this happens. Right, how many of you have seen the dinosaur game? Right, how many of you have no idea what I'm talking about? This is a game. I'll show you later. So, right, because generally when you put a lot of people in a space that is not, when you put a lot of technology people in a space that is not designed for a lot of technology people, we overwhelm the internet and it doesn't work and you get this. But what you really want is you want to get this, right? So what if there was a way where I had a set of data that's not going to change? The schedule doesn't change very often. And I want it to just work every time on a website. And that's part of the idea behind progressive web apps. And so what we're going to do in this talk, very quickly, let me set expectations. How many of you build progressive web apps today? Okay, I've got 3, and I will call on you randomly to make sure that what I'm saying is correct. Deal? Okay. So what I want to do with a progressive web app in this case is I have a set of data that's not going to change, and I have internet that doesn't necessarily work all the time. I want it to work all the time. I want every time this thing comes up on my phone or my browser, I want it to work. And so that's what we're going to do today is I'm just going to kind of walk you through very simply, step by step, how you make this happen. Do not expect that you're going to walk out of a 50-minute session, go into the office tomorrow, and start writing a progressive web app, which would be great. Do that, but you're going to Google a lot because I'm not going to cover everything right here. It's hard, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, but let's talk about real quick what a progressive web app is, because that's one of the problems that it solves. It's not all of the problems that it solves, but it's one of the problems that it solves. And so ultimately, a progressive web app is the idea of trying to take a web page or a web application. Most of us who are especially just JavaScript developers, most of what we do now is all of our business code is moving to the front end. So now they're not web pages anymore. They're web applications. So I want to take a web application and I want to make it work all the time. How many were in the talk just before this one? Right, so it is very possible you've got people on not a 3G network, you've got dial-up, you've got very flaky internet. You just want stuff to work all the time. You want it to be fast. So one of the things about progressive web apps is very low load time. The application we're going to use has a very low load time because it's very bare bones so that everybody can understand it. But that's one of the parts of it. And engaging. Okay, I am not going to talk about this part of it at all except for the next 10 seconds. In the modern realm, we use things like, who uses Bootstrap? Right, why do you use Bootstrap? Because it's responsive, right? It makes making responsive things very easy. It's very standard and it just works. We've solved is a strong word. It is much easier for us to build the responsive things with things like Bootstrap or some other packages. So I'm not going to talk about that too much. But that's the idea. We want it to work whether I'm here on my laptop, on my phone, wherever I've set it. Because how many of you, honestly, when you need to go to a web page, how many of you reach for this before you reach for that? Like many of us, right? Depends on where you're at. If you're sitting at work, that's one thing, right? But generally, I surf the net here, not here. Okay, so let's talk about what we're doing. I have a website that I have built. Can you read this? Is this good? I prepped ahead of time. I asked people, and they said it was good. So if you can't read it, it's not my fault. It's theirs. But that's okay. I can adjust. Okay, so we have a React application. Now let me show you just a little bit about a React. Ultimately, React, Angular, whatever you're building pieces, and those pieces stack, and they, it's like Legos, right? You stick them all together, they form a web page. And so a component is just that. So what you have here is on index. We come into index, and there you go. There's my whole index. That's it. So ID equals root, React sees that and just drops the app component right there. And so what all the app components are going to do is when it starts up, I'm going to create this thing called books. And books is empty. It's just an array, right? So when my component loads, I create this empty thing called books. Then, when I click on a button, Axios. Who uses Axios in the room? Okay, Axios just handles my gets and all my HTTP traffic. Makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to use Axios to go and pull a list of books that looks a little bit like, not a little bit, it looks exactly like this because it is actually this. So it's just a list of books. That's all it is. This list doesn't change. It sits there forever. And then, when I click the button, I do an unclick, and then I just loop over it and I spit it out to a web page. That's all I'm doing. It's very simple, very straightforward, because if I make it more complicated, now I divide attention. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to do npm start. I'm going to load this thing up. We now have a website that is running. What's going to happen when I hit refresh? You guys tell me, because I just walked you through it. I'm going to get a list of books, right? Nothing fancy. It just works. Okay, if that part didn't work, then I knew it would be in for a long day. Okay. How many of you use this thing, this bottom thing, on a daily basis? If you're doing JavaScript development, you should. Okay, so there are several tabs in this thing that most of you use, and there are several tabs in this thing that I'm going to bet most of you didn't even know existed. You see them, but you don't know that they're there. So we're going to talk about some of those tabs today. So the first one being network. So network simply just shows what's going on. So if I hit refresh, right, here's all the stuff that gets hit. Most of you have seen the network one right before. Okay, network also has this very interesting thing that allows me to click this offline button right there and take my application offline. Now what's going to happen when I hit refresh now? Simple, not a trick question. It obviously is not going to work, right? I'm going to hit refresh and I get failed. Like a hard failure, and nothing happens, and it's just broken. If I refresh the page as a whole, there we go. There's the dinosaur game. And so if you don't know the dinosaur game, my son, who is 12, has an Xbox and a PlayStation and a phone. And he will, at home, turn off the Wi-Fi on his laptop and play this game. And I'm like, what are you doing? But that's, I don't know, that's kids. Okay. And that's really all it is. It gets harder. It's kind of like Flappy Bird. Did you guys ever, right? Okay, anyway, sorry. So I turn it back online, and when I turn it back online, everything works. The only reason I show you all that is that here in just a minute, none of that's going to happen, and I needed to prove to you that it actually was going to do. Okay. How many of you have heard the phrase Lighthouse? So there used to be an app called Lighthouse. And what Lighthouse did was examined your web application and made sure it conformed to certain standards. So you used to have to install it. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. So there's a reason why you will not see a single thing that says Lighthouse anywhere in this thing, except the icon. That's why the icon, that's not even an icon, it's just a picture that's hanging out over there. What Lighthouse does is audit your application to make sure that it works the way that you think it works. And you can audit it for all kinds of things. So Right here, I'm auditing on mobile. I could do desktop. I've got several audits I can perform. Performance, progressive web apps, which is the point of this talk, so that's what we're going to do. I can do best practices. It'll audit SEO ability on your, this is great. It does a lot of stuff. And then it can simulate your network connection and all that. Has anybody ever played, one last thing, with this button right here? Notice, like, when I do that, it shows me all the different phones and how my app looks on different phones. I can do online, low-end mobile. Google DevTools is pretty awesome. Okay, so back to audits. Actually, hold on. There we go. Okay, I'm going to run an audit, and let's see what happens. Notice the first thing it does is it shrinks it down to mobile, and then it's going to do a whole bunch of stuff. Notice it went offline. I need JavaScript. Okay, so now I have my progressive web app audit. And my progressive web app audit came back at 50, which is not good, but it's not 0. That's important to note. And so let's see what we've done right? So the page loads fast on 3G. I hope so, because it can't get much smaller than what we're dealing with right now. We have a viewport meta tag, only because I don't, contains some content when JavaScript is not available. So this is important because, do I have any like security people in the room? No, okay. That'll be more important here in a second. How many of you actually like disable JavaScript in your browser from time to time? Right, that's a fairly good practice to do because you never know what's going on. But even when JavaScript is disabled, you should still do something. And what do? If we go back to our code, and I go to index.html, check this out. No script. I have a no script tag that says you need JavaScript. So I don't do much. But at least I do something that says, hey, I'm shutting this whole thing down if you don't have JavaScript. Usually, you might put some actual detail in there. I could still display things or whatever. Okay. And then content is size. Now let's look at the stuff that didn't work. So the first one, and if I had not given my introduction, this stuff is weird. Does not respond with a 200 when offline. What does 200 mean? Okay. If you're offline, you shouldn't get an okay because it's not, right? You should be broken. But it wants you to respond with a 200 when offline. It wants you to install the web app. It wants to redirect HTTP to HTTPS. And then the fourth one does not register a service worker. And we haven't talked about those yet. Let's talk about those, because that ultimately is like the crux of the entire thing that we're going to talk about. Okay, so let's go back over here for just a second. Okay, so there's two things we're going to fix right off the bat. So it does not register a service worker and does not respond with a 200 when offline. All right, who in the room, I expect at least 3 hands, knows what a service worker is? Okay, I got 3 hands, but they were different hands. Anybody in the room morally opposed to hand raising? Right. Many of you are, but you don't know how to express it at this time. Okay, anyway, sorry, that's horrible. Okay, so a service worker. How many of you have heard of a web worker? Okay, some of you. What is a web worker? A web worker is something that lets you spin up a process over here and do some work over here, right? Those are not the same thing. Just like to be clear, don't confuse the two because they're not the same. So I asked the security people were in the room, and I didn't get any hands because I'm about to say something that sounds like a really bad idea, and it kind of is. What a service worker does, when you install a service worker as part of your application, it sits in between the browser and the backend, interrupts every HTTP call that is made, and does whatever it wants with it. That's fairly terrifying, actually, because you can send, hey, get JSON data, and it will say, no, I'm going to go get this thing over here instead, and then return it as if it was JSON data. Or post my username and password. No, I'm going to send your username and password to these people over here just in case, which is why the requirement is it must always be HTTPS. Because there is a myth that HTTPS will somehow make your website more secure. It doesn't really as much as you think it does, but that's fine. Okay, so a service worker is this thing that just sits here, which is what makes this work, right? So think about it. If the service worker is interrupting all the HTTP calls, if I send an HTTP call and my network's down, the service worker that's sitting in your browser can just say, well, my network's down, but it doesn't matter. I'll just respond with something else and make it work, which is actually what we're about to go do. Okay, so there's two pieces to a service worker that you have to do in order to make this thing work. So the first one is in your index.html. I'm going to kind of gloss through this stuff because most people, always, when you do this, you're going to go Google it anyway. So don't worry so much about the specifics. But if service worker exists on the navigator, which means you're not, we'll talk about this in just a little while. Progressive web apps aren't going to work for everyone, which is a problem in and of itself. But if it can, then we're going to register it. We're going to pull this thing called offline. Otherwise, I'm just going to say we can't do it. Okay. When I install, notice this little group right here. When I load my service worker, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out to index.html, data.json, my bundle. I'm just going to go pull them all because I know you're online right now because otherwise you couldn't have pulled the service worker. I'm going to go get everything I need for my web page and I'm going to cache it. And I'm going to hold on to it. Then I'm going to activate it. Okay, and then basically the heart of a service worker is in the fetch. So fetch is the JavaScript go get stuff, right? And so what you do is you interrupt fetch, and we're going to say, hey, guess what? I'm going to look in my cache for this event, for this request. And if that cache exists, I'm just going to return it. Done. I'm not going to worry about anything else. If it doesn't exist, then I'm actually going to go run the fetch, go get my code, and then I'm going to cache it, and then I'll never have to get it again. That's it. That's what all this stuff does. Let's talk about it. All right. All right, so get next. Okay, so what you see now is I've got my service worker code, and I've got my offline JS. I'll walk back through it here in a minute. And my page refreshed. When my page refreshed, is that behind all the boxes? Like this stuff right here? Can you see that? Okay. Notice the little gear sitting next to offline index data and bundle. What that means is that the service worker, when it loaded up, what was the first thing the service worker was going to do? It was going to go cache everything. So the service worker went and cached offline index data and bundle. And then it's ready to go. What happens when I hit refresh? First of all, is it going to work? Yes, it's going to work because I'm still online. But look at this right here. This line right here. Notice I don't have bytes. So like where that is way over there. Okay. Data.json is 704. I don't know if I'm on the same line or not. It doesn't matter. But when I went and got it, it came from the service worker. There is no get to the server. Everything stayed right there. When I refresh my page, notice localhost and bundle came from the service worker. They did not go back to the server. To make this even more scary, if I close my browser, create a new window, and go to 3000, create a new window, and go to 3000, I still am coming from the service worker. This was the thing, right? The service worker interrupts the page forever, right? It's there. And when you close it, you reboot, all of that stuff, it's going to be sitting there. Let me show you one other tab that you may or may not have seen before. How many of you have played with the application tab? Okay, the application tab is actually fairly interesting. So check this out. If we play with the application tab, there's a couple of things. One is service workers. So it says, hey, I have a service worker with the client, what it's at, what the source of it is, to let you know it's there, and I can remove it. And I'm going to have to remove it manually here in just a minute to do something else. I also have my application cache, my cache storage. I've got my cookies, IndexedDB, everything. It's all right here. So look at this. In my DevReach, I don't think I pointed this out, I created a cache called DevReach in my web page because that's where we're at, so might as well. In my cache, in my DevReach cache, notice I've got all this stuff. I've got my slash. I've got my data.json. It's already there. It's all here. If I remove something from my cache, then it's not in the cache anymore. Then when I go back over to my service worker, it's going to have to go pull it again because it's not going to find it. And then everything else that I've needed over time. Okay. It also gives me the opportunity to clear my storage. Like you can go in here and you can just like clear out all the site data, which is great sometimes because we're going to have to do that here in a minute as well. Okay. So when I do this and I go back to network and I go offline and I click refresh, what's going to happen? Is what? Yeah, it'll work just fine. Because I went and pulled data.json, but only from my service worker. It didn't have to go anywhere. What happens if I refresh my page? Same thing. Notice things are breaking. I tried to get favicon, and I didn't cache that, so that's broken. And actually, it's even broken up in the top. And I refresh. It still works. What happens when I close my browser? Go back to localhost. It still works. Now this is the point, right? This is exactly what I was saying before. If I go to this website on my phone, and I register as a service worker, and I cache my schedule, when I walk out and I turn my phone back on, I open up my browser and I go to get the schedule, guess what? Doesn't matter if I'm online or not. It's going to work. Always. All the time. Questions on that? How many of you see a horrible problem? Okay. I have an issue here that I'm going to fix later. What happens if my data changes? Right. If I come over here, I usually get the question, so I am calling it out. And I just say, hey, war. And I refresh, and I hit refresh. It didn't change. Why didn't it change? Because I cached it, right? So here in just a minute, I'll show you how we deal with that problem. I put it kind of at the end, just in case. Okay. Oh, I didn't run the audit. Okay, so let's run our audit again. Let's see what's happening. Okay, so we're going to run the same thing. What do? I do register a service worker. I do return a 200 when I'm offline. I do all of that stuff. I'm up to 73%. I have a son who is in college, and he will tell me, and he has told me, a 73% is fine. It's okay. I passed. Which is technically true, but not okay. So we're at a 73%, which technically isn't horrible, but doesn't get us there. We want to get much better than that. So user will not be prompted to install the web app. And then a couple other things that say no manifest was fetched. So let's talk about that. And let's first talk about the first thing, right? What if I have my schedule? I have my DevReach thing. I don't want to even have to load the browser. I just want to hit schedule on my home page and have it pull it up. That's what progressive web apps do, right? Sometimes, not always, and we'll talk about that. But okay, think about this not from software development perspective. Think about this just from the world. What is a manifest? I don't know what the Bulgarian word for manifest is. It's the same? Oh, that's awesome. Okay. It's like on the metro, like park, because we're at the business park, the hotel. And so I can read park because it looks fundamentally different, but you know what I mean. So at least okay, manifest is the same. So what is a manifest? Like in shipping. Like if I'm going to ship things and I have a shipping manifest. What? Yeah, it's just a list of stuff. Here's the details around this shipment. Same basic idea. I want to create a file that is ultimately a list of details around my application. User will not, okay. A manifest describes, so it just, somebody remind me to fix that slide. Okay, and then application context are the big words that are sitting right about here on my slides. Okay, so the manifest basically just, it's a list of things that describes your application, right? So first things first, you have to pull the manifest in index.html. And it actually has its own thing. It's not a style sheet or anything else. It's a manifest. And we just pull that in. And then this is basically what it is. It's got a short name, it's got some icons, it's got a start URL, some theme colors, because when the browser sees this, it's going to say, hey, I have enough information to now just put a thing on the desktop. And when you click on this thing on the desktop, I can load it up and I can navigate to index.html and run it. And I'm done. So that's all, ultimately, that's all a manifest is. It's got some other things in it too, like the icons and stuff. And I'll show you that. Okay, so what the manifest does, I'm going to change this to DevReach. I thought I changed everything, but I missed one. Okay, so what the manifest does is, Now when I reload my page and I come to my application and I go to manifest, I don't get a manifest. Why? Right, because it's cached. Everything is cached, and I am online though, so that's at least good. If I go back to my application, I have to unregister my service worker. Then I have to refresh. Now I have a new service worker down here, and now I have a manifest. So just working with service workers, like prepare yourself for some fun when you do this. Because when the whole point is to hijack all your back-end communication, it gets fun. Okay, so here I've got my DevReach library demo. I've even got an icon. Check this out. I've got an icon that looks like a little book. Yay, okay. I've got some theme colors. I've got some stuff. Now notice, I now have a link called Add to Home Screen. What do you think that's going to do in Chrome here? I'm going to click Add to Home Screen, and it apparently does nothing. I got no errors over here, but it's okay. It would be nice if it would say something, but it doesn't. I'm going to come over here. Why? Add. It asked me the question. Like an hour ago, it worked perfectly. Restore pages, yes. Inspect. All right, one more time. Let's go to my application. No manifest detected. Of course. Manifest, add to home screen, add, create. There it goes. There it is. Okay. We almost had catastrophe, right? But now, see, I've got my my logo. I've got my name. Remember, those were all in my manifest. And then if I take my browser offline, I can click on this, and everything still works. So that's not nearly as impressive as doing it on your phone, because it looks different, but we'll get there. All right. Oh, let's audit this thing one more time. Now let's audit it. Okay. What am I going to get? To take a wild guess. 92. Significantly better than 85. Thank you. But I feel good about 92. The only thing so if my son came home and said I got a 92, that's definitely better than the 70, whatever we had before. I'm missing one thing. I'm not redirecting HTTP traffic to HTTPS. We talked about the importance of that, because if somebody hijacks and installs a service worker and ruins yeah, okay. So, but really what I want to do is I want to try it here, right? It's cool that it works here. I want to try it here. And so how many of you use a thing called Github Pages? How many of you have heard of Github Pages before? One person, two people. Well, you can't, everybody's like, it's like I'm at an auction. 3 people, 5 people, okay. Okay, I'm just going to stop counting. All right, so let's deploy this out somewhere so that we can try it. So this whole thing is out on GitHub. So I checked everything on GitHub, which is why I can do the git next, git I didn't do a git previous, but I can kind of walk through. So it's out there. There's a thing called Github Pages. And so what Github Pages does is I can install that, I can run a command, and it'll deploy it out to jonathanfmills.github.io / whatever the name of the thing is. I add it to my home page, all that stuff. I'm not going to care so much about that. Somebody, anybody, I don't care who, if you go out to this website, you can do the same thing on your phone. And I'm curious, I'm going to conduct a little experiment. So what I'm interested in from you is, 1, does the page even load to begin with? Or have I sent you to the wrong place? Because that is a risk. It worked. Okay, excellent. One person made it. So did you get prompted who got prompted to install the app? Okay. But those of you who said nope, I want you to notice that there are a number of people with their hands up. So now I'm going, let's talk about this for a second. There were. Okay, they put them back down again. Okay. So those of you who say nope, it did not install, what phone are you using? iPhone. Did anybody have an iPhone and it did work? Okay, if you're on an iPhone, go to Share, ironically, add to home screen, and then it will install it. I don't know why it's under the Share menu, but that's weird and I don't like it, but it doesn't matter. That's what Apple chose to do. If you're on an Android phone, not all of them are the same, but for the most part, it should have just worked. If you're on a Windows phone, it will never work. For a different reason than you think. Microsoft, they're actively avoiding implementing it. Because what happens now? What if I could do this and install everything directly to your desktop or your phone? What am I circumventing? The App Store. How much revenue does Apple make off the App Store? Like a lot. It is not in their best interest to allow you to do that. So they've made it a little bit more difficult to do. Now, if you have installed it locally, you can try turning mobile data off and refresh, and it should still work. So you can play around with this a little bit and see. So in general, iPhones, you have to go through an extra step to get there. Android should, for the most part, work. But the problem with Android is there's so many different options. And the point of this, really, the reason why I have a bunch of you do it is so that, in general, you can see about. Many people had it working, many people didn't have it working, what the issues are. Okay. So let's do this. I promise you we'd do one other thing. Okay, so the problem was I cache everything right off the bat. And the reason why I cache everything right off the bat is because then it's very easy for me to turn around and show you that I have cached everything, and then we can use it, right? I mean, it's more of a demonstration thing. What if I don't want to do that? So let me fix this real quick. I changed a couple things, so let me... Okay, what if I do this instead? Let me go to offline.js. So now, in my fetch, hold please. Now, in my fetch, always be prepared. Okay. There we go. Okay. I commented out the response. So I still check to see if I have it in my cache, but if I have it, I'm not returning it yet. What happens Let me just ask you this question. If I do a fetch and I'm offline, what happens? It throws an error, right? So I'm in a promise, and it throws the error. So what if it doesn't throw an error, I just go with it. And then when it does throw an error, I return my response. So now I'm checking every time. And if it breaks, then I'm going to return whatever's in my cache. And I'm updating my cache all the time. Okay, so let's save that. Let's make sure I'm still running. Let's come back over here. Application, I'm going to just delete everything. All right, are you ready for this? I'm going to refresh. That's awesome. I have no idea what it's doing. That's not localhost 3000. There I go. Inspect. I was offline, but it would have anyway. I love the internet. Okay, let's check my offline JS. Make sure. Yep, it's the right one. So I'm going to hit refresh here, and I got my War and Peace. Because if I go back to my network, notice what happened. Data.json, when I hit refresh, I hit data.json, and hey, that came from the service worker. So it still does that, but notice what's right below it. The service worker with the little gear made a call and pulled it back. So now, that wasn't there before. Now I'm actually making that call every time. So I hit refresh. If I come back over and I go to data.json and I change this to this, I save it, and I hit refresh, now it's working. If I go offline, I hit refresh, it doesn't work anymore. Or it still works, sorry. Peace. Notice it didn't update. And it didn't update because I'm offline. But the minute I come back online, now it updates, right? So that's there is the opposite, the alternative implementation of I'm only going to go when I need to. You can, do the check. Hey, is this changed? If it hasn't changed, I'm just going to restore the cache. If it has changed, I'm going to go pull everything back. All of those things can be done. All right. Questions? I've got about 5 minutes for questions, if you have any. You do not have to have questions, but if you have questions, let me know what's going on. If you have no questions, you may go. Thank you guys very much.